Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Good evening, good middle of the night, if that's where you are. My name is James. We are here with the HTBox AllReady community stand-up, and we're a little bit lighter today. It is myself doing the community stand-up, but I have a few. We have a few things that we want to kind of cover here really quickly. So I'm going to do that right now with you. We have been working to move our code over from web jobs to Azure Functions. And so I'm just going to walk through really quickly the project that we've got set up for that. And we're going to start adding issues there for all of the work items that need to be completed that would allow us to move the Azure Function pieces over. And I'll maybe just start by sharing my screen and kind of walk through what is actually happening there. All right, we got that groovy 80s disco thing going on. Wonderful. So the repo for Azure Functions for the Azure Functions project is over at already-processing. So you're on github.com, whack HTBox, whack already processing. There's only 2 commits there right now. It's basically just the initial get goingness things that are required. So in here, though, is the Azure Functions project. I've got a couple of notes that I've added to the show notes there, so you can jump down and have a look at the show notes, and you'll see that there's a link to the Azure Storage Explorer, and this is going to be something that we're going to use in a minute here to kind of throw a message into a queue just to test locally and make sure everything's running. And then another one is the Azure Functions emulator. You'll also actually need the Azure Storage emulator. So I'll add these docs as well to the event, but basically what you want to do is make sure you've got the Azure SDK, make sure that you've got the Azure Functions tools installed, and the link will be again in the show notes. And then this is just a super handy tool for testing things really quickly, the Azure Storage Explorer. So we'll walk through that on how to make that happen right now. So just really quickly back to the repository. The repository for the already processing bits, the function bits, is already connected through to our out to our deployment in the cloud. So you can see here that I've got this queue test function that's part of the project. This is really just meant it won't be, ultimately it won't be deployed out to the cloud, but right now just end-to-end testing. We will leave this in the project so that you can ensure that you are running locally. If it's your first time working with Azure Functions, we want to make sure it's as easy as possible for you to get started. So over to the code. We've got simply a function here that has a queue-triggered parameter called string item, and there's a TraceWriter log. And then we just log out to the TraceWriter. A message was dequeued from the queue test queue, and it says item. Let me really quickly pop over to... I've already been working a fair bit here, so let me see if I can delete all these at the same time. No, it's not going to let me do that. Okay. We'll just delete these all. This is one of the most exciting parts of the show. You just wait. It's going to get even more exciting as we get going through here. So I have a couple more to do. As you can see, I've been doing a lot with Azure Functions lately, and many of the artifacts of that are still sticking around. Okay, so now that I've deleted all the queues, this guy is actually going to be looking for a queue called queue test, and if it doesn't exist, then nothing will happen. Locally, I've got this connection equals blank. We will have the connection settings already configured in deployment to Azure. So what you will need to do if you are working locally, and we'll have this information in the repo, is to make sure that you've got these values set up inside the local settings.json. And then what we're doing is we're saying use development storage equals true. That's going to instruct the Azure emulator, the Azure Functions emulator, to use these values. These are the known names. These are the default assumed names if we're not doing the configuration on our own, which we're not. We are allowing Azure Functions just to do what it does with the queue trigger. So it's going to test the queue test queue, and then it's going to dequeue that item and just output it to the console, wherever the trace writer is logging to. So I'm going to hit run here, and we'll see the this guy pop up in the background. It goes and checks, and it sees there's nothing going on, so it just sits there and waits. Now I'm going to pop into here, and I'm going to create a new queue, and we just name that guy queue-test, and now we can just add a message and say hello already, and we can say okay. And this will be the most exciting part. We're just going to wait for this emulator to blinkety blink. There it goes. That actually was pretty quick. So I think it takes it cycles every 30 seconds. It checks your local queues. So here it just has this hello already. So that's kind of interesting. We threw a message into the queue, and if I hit refresh over here, that queue disappears, clears out. We threw a message into the queue, it picks it up, and then it outputs it to the console. That's not really what we're interested in kind of tackling here. We're interested in something a little bit more deep, and so this will start to be obvious here pretty quickly once I add some more info. So I'm just going to add some class with some data in it so we can see maybe just a person class. Kind of doing this on the fly, so this is guaranteed to work. Let's add a string for first name, and we'll add a string for last name. And now what we're going to do is go over to this function that we've got. Instead of using a string, I'm going to use a person, and we'll do person as the parameter. Red squigglies, add the namespace. Okay, so we'll use person. Oh, that changed the parameter name. There's adding the namespace. Okay, so if I do person.firstname, you can see that I've actually got access to the properties of that object now. That's because I'm in an interpolated string, and we have IntelliSense working for us against this person object. Now I've gone from a string item to a person object. If you are sensing something familiar, as in this looks and feels a little bit like the MVC parameter binding, you're not too far off at all. In fact, anything that's stored in the queue as JSON will automatically be deserialized into our person object. That can be a partial object, it can be a complete object. The parameters that match will be filled inside the object. When I hit run again, we're going to go and prime that queue with another message. Oh, actually, I'll show you something that's interesting here. There's some artifacts that are generated at runtime when you build in Azure Functions. And I think there's going to be an upgrade to the tooling that fixes this. But right now it says it's missing a trigger argument named item. If you recall, that's actually the name of the parameter when it was a string. The way to get rid of that message, so you're not running into that function compilation error, is simply just to do a clean solution. And when you run it again, it'll clear that error message out for you. So again, what we're trying to do here through this process by having a message that we can send to the queue is to take the IO bound and the disk bound and the network bound and the SQL bound operations that are a little bit heavier running, and to batch them off into some processing that doesn't affect the performance of the website. You can imagine when we've got 2,000 volunteers or 10,000 people who are getting smoke alarms installed, or 40,000 people that need to be evacuated, whatever the reason may be for reaching out to folks, if it's through SendGrid or Twilio or otherwise. If we want to get some messaging out there, we want it to happen as quickly as possible. And when we click send, we don't want the website to sit there and hang until 2,000 emails are sent, or 10 or 40,000. We want the website to come right back. So we're going to put a message in the queue. The first step in something that big might be to fan out. But the point is, then we can have many functions running and processing queue messages on the fly. But the first thing that we need to do is to get the IO bound operations and the latency bound operations off of the website proper, so that stays and remains highly responsive. So if we push some information about a person, maybe we've got their email address in it, et cetera, we push a a message out to the queue, then it would be picked up by the corresponding function. It would then be able to send an email out, dispatch a message out to SendGrid. So I've got this person.firstname, person.lastname. These are the properties that are being expected. Let's go dive back into Storage Explorer. I'm going to add a new message in here, and this is just going to expect JSON. So the format is pretty simple. I just say first name is Peter, and last name is Parker. Here, he's a good kid. I hit OK here, and then again, we just have to wait until the functions emulator picks up the message. It happens very quickly in the cloud. I have rarely had the opportunity to go in and pick up something before it gets dequeued or to see it using the Explorer. So as long as this guy is here, we will keep seeing this message in the queue. And eventually when I hit sometime between when I click the refresh button and I click it again, the message will be picked up by, and then it disappears. And here it is. So queue test message, Peter Parker. The emulator is pretty good. It tells you which functions it's emulating, why it's emulating. You get a pretty good amount of information here. You've got the ability as well to debug. So this is super handy because this is a fully scalable solution. Azure Functions can get pretty big pretty quickly, and it doesn't cost a lot of money at all. And so that works really well when you're dealing with nonprofits and charities and things like that, community organizations. We don't want to have a lot of cost carried with this. We want this to be as free can be. So I did set a breakpoint there. I'm just going to add another message in there and show you. So if you're doing something a little bit more complicated than just echoing out a person out to the console, then you probably want to, you might want to be debugging interactively. You might want to be putting additional logging statements in there so that you can see them, and the emulator allows us to do that fairly easily when we're working locally. So I threw that message into the queue, and now when it goes and picks up when it starts execution, it'll actually dive in. The parameter binding will be completed, and we'll be able to jump in and actually debug our message as soon as it gets popped off the queue. So there it goes. It says executing queue test. It tells us the reason why it found a new message. And you can see here I've got my data in here, Bruce Wayne. Okay, so those are some basics for Azure Functions. If you are wanting to move web jobs over, you'll see that they actually have similar characteristics. They're in our main repository. So I will pop back over to here, and in our main repository, if you have a look at the code, let's dive in here to the AllReady app, and it is in the notifications web job. We've got the functions are right here. And it says that we've got some, we'll have to clean this up here. We've got some package lock stuff here. We'll take care of that soon. But let's have a look. We've got process SMS queue, process email queue message. These are just a couple of things that are that need to be moved over. And in fact, if you want to have another look, we have another branch here. If we head back to the AllReady app, actually we'll just head back to AllReady and have a look at the branch. We have an Azure Functions branch, and this has the new functions as they've already been pulled over. So notifications processing, this is the Azure function. So there's a process SMS queue message, a process email queue message. These are the guys that need to be moved over. So we will do that. I will set up some issues in the repository that will allow us to kind of track those changes as we get going. So we still have lots going on. I have lost my Hangouts window there. We still have lots going on in terms of trying to get our way to 125 pull requests by March 4th. So we're still reaching out to that MVP community worldwide. We've got 5 regions. We'd love to have 25 contributions from each of the 5 regions, 125 pull requests by March 4th. That's what our goal is. So if you want to work on the project, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can find us on GitHub at HTBox AllReady. You can get us on Twitter. We're at HTBox. Follow us on Facebook. There's all kinds of ways to get in touch with us. So again, today just covering really quickly what needs to happen in terms of IO bound processing, moving over to Azure Functions from web jobs, and knowing that your work will be going to support the greater good. We're hoping that you're able to spend some time and contribute. Thank you very much. We will be back next week, 2 p.m. Central. We'll have a couple more people on the show, and we're going to give you some progress on some design related things. We're making a lot of progress on the look and feel and the user experience of the app, and we're super excited to share some of that stuff. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.